computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Hello, and welcome back to episode 24 of Sci-Fi Snacks. This is the final episode of season 2, and I am so excited to have you here today to chat with me about the novel Snow Crash. If I'm being honest with you, I wasn't quite sure if I had bitten off more than I could chew, pun fully intended, with the idea for this episode. I had been told again and again when I talked about reading short punk fiction that I needed to read 2 different books. The first one was William Gibson's Neuromancer, which we talked about earlier this season, that coined the term cyberpunk and really opened up this genre on a wider stage. And the other book that kept coming up was Snow Crash. Now, I committed publicly to reading Snow Crash before I had even actually ordered the book. And I don't know if I would have when I received this book in the mail and I realized just how big it was. Now, for a podcast where we are reading stories that are 500 words, 1,000 words, at most, I think our biggest story to date was, I think in season 1, we read a novelette that was in like the 10,000 word space. Compared to all of those, Snow Crash is, and I want to get this number right, the number I found most often for word count was 162,578 words. For perspective, for those people who don't think in word count size, when you are a writer looking to sell your first book, the goal is to keep it under 100,000 words, because in general, no publisher is going to take that financial risk on something bigger than 100,000 words. Now, science fiction does get a little leeway because we've got some more world building and things like that, but as a rule of thumb, 100,000 words is your top. A lot of books are in that 70 to 80,000 word range. So Snow Crash is about twice that. So think of your average novel and double it. Page counts obviously vary by how big are the pages, how big's the font, all of those things. They're not standard, which is why we use word count. But the book that I got that was really dense was 440 pages. I'm not opposed to big books. I like big books, and I cannot lie. But this was a lot. I was about 3 weeks ahead on my recording schedule, and today I'm recording on Tuesday. This episode will go live Thursday. So this is the closest I've ever cut one of these episodes, but I'm really proud of it. Thank you to all of my friends who were watching my Snapchats and cheering me on as I literally gave myself headaches and was pushing myself to finish this book and also still have a life and do work and all of those things. So I'm giving myself a little pat on the back for finishing this huge book. Now, lucky for you, you can read the book or you can listen to me talk for the next 40 to 50 minutes and you'll get to experience all of the highs and maybe some of the lows and definitely get to hear about my favorite parts of this cyberpunk satire, hard to define science fiction novel. In terms of snacks, I decided that because this book was much bigger than snack size, I would also be having not so much a snack as a little feast. So what I'm doing is to celebrate finishing this book, and to celebrate finishing season 2 of Sci-Fi Snacks, I am throwing myself a little pizza party. My family eats pizza every Friday night because I just can't be bothered to figure out anything else by the end of the week. But this week, we're going to make it special. Now, why pizza? If anybody has ever talked to you about Snow Crash, you might come to find that there is one thing that they all pick up on first, and it's that our main character is a pizza delivery guy for the mafia in a futuristic dystopian United States, which is now technically an alternate history because we are beyond the time period of when this book was actually set. People much smarter than me with numbers figured out with all of the dates and things and all the clues, and the book is probably set around the year 2000. Now, Snow Crash published in 1992. He started writing in 88. So he was looking about 10 years in the future. And now that's about 25 years in our past. That's one of my favorite things about science fiction is unless somebody is writing far future stuff or looking back, these near futures, we get to see what's different. What did they predict that was correct? What did they get wrong? What is delightfully quaint in the stories versus what is creepily correct. And I think there's a lot of that in this book. Before we dive in, though, let me just give you a quick overview of our author. So Neal Stephenson is the author of the New York Times bestsellers, including The Diamond Age, Zodiac, Kryptonomicon, Quicksilver, The Confusion, The Systems of the World, Read Me, Anathema, Seven Eves, Fall or Dodge in Hell, and Termination Shock, as well as the nonfiction works such as In the Beginning Was the Command Line. He has worked for Blue Origin and Magic Leap, and more recently co-founded Lamina One, a startup creating an open metaverse platform. Now, when I was researching for this episode, I spent a little bit of time on Stevenson's website, and what I thought was really interesting was his little blurb about Snow Crash that I wanted to share with you as well. He says that Snow Crash was written in an attempt to salvage a few elements from an earlier graphic novel project. This book became important and changed my life. While the number of copies sold still isn't as large as people tend to assume, it made far more of an impact than my earlier works and launched my career in a number of ways. And I thought that was really cool that you see this conversation if you stick around writing spaces enough that book sales don't always directly correlate to success or impact or things like that. But it is an interesting space, especially because those numbers are really obscured. As you dig into it, it's very hard to find out exactly how many copies of any book are out there that have sold. The publishing industry, if they have good numbers, they hide the good numbers and they count different things. It's very opaque in a lot of ways to find out how much things have sold. So I think that it's very possible that a book like Snow Crash that has been so impactful, like Stevenson says, you would think that it was sold more, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has. What I can see is that this book starts conversations. It was full of just wild ideas when it first came out. You know, what other people told me about Snow Crash before I read it were just that it had these amazing vibes, that I had to read it, that it was satire, but because we're so far in the future now, some of the satire doesn't really feel like satire. It feels like reality, which I'm sure everyone listening understands that uncomfortable space where you're like, oh, hashtag not the onion, when we see news articles and we're like, oh, is that the onion? No, that's reality. We definitely had some of those moments in this book. And then there was a great article by Chuck Wendig called Perfectly Gonzo, Neal Stephenson's Snow Crash, where he just waxed poetic and got really excited about this book because to him, it was the book that kind of broke open his brain. Opening up Snow Crash and reading that perfect and perfectly gonzo banana pants opening chapter was like the first time I connected to the internet. You get this sense of, what is this place? It's something new. The rules are unknown. The laws remain undetermined. It's wild and ill-mannered. And yes, so that was Chuck Wendig on Reactor Mag. And it just felt like anybody that I talked to about this book who had read it was just so passionate about it. And I had to know more. So a little bit about the plot of the book. Obviously, it's 162,000 something words. We're not going to get all of that in the podcast. What I will give you is a brief overview of the really important characters and kind of the big arc of the story. So that gonzo banana pants first chapter is where we meet the Deliberator, who we find out is our main character, whose name is, get this, Hero Protagonist, spelled Hiro, and he is half black and half Japanese. His name is obviously tongue-in-cheek. He is our hero protagonist. So from the jump, you're like, oh, this book does not take itself seriously. And what we find in this very first chapter is Hiro is delivering a pizza for the mafia, because the mafia has the corner on pizza delivery service in this kind of dystopian, libertarian, capitalistic, near future America. The United States still exists, but it is nothing like what we know. There are some pretty close representations of what certain people would love our country to become, where everything is divided up by corporations and megachurches, and there's a little part that's carved out for the federal government, but for the most part, it's a whole bunch of sovereign nations that take care of themselves. There are no real laws anymore other than what people will enforce with money. There are the enforcers who are like our private police system. And then there are people like Hero Protagonist who deliver pizzas, and he has to defend himself in this kind of lawless land. So what Hero does is he is a master swordsman, because of course he is. His guns aren't scary to people anymore. This is America. Come on, nobody's scared of a gun, which, ouch, okay. But he has 2 huge swords on his back. So he goes out delivering pizzas dressed up like a samurai and is really scary, and he will actually literally cut you if you try to take his pizza. Now, you may be thinking, what's the big deal about the pizzas? Like, why would somebody want to steal that? Here's the deal. The mafia has a deal that if they cannot deliver your pizza in 30 minutes or less, you will get an apology from the head of the mafia himself. This guy named Uncle Enzo. He will literally come to your house and apologize and grovel to you and all of these things, because that's the promise. Your pizza in 30 minutes or less. And I thought that this was a delightful little throwback. I know I never lived growing up in a land of pizza delivery. We had to drive to get our pizzas because we lived in the middle of nowhere. You had to go pick them up. But then when I left my hometown and I went to college, there was this time where it was like, yeah, 30 minutes or less, and there'd be a countdown, and it was a whole big thing, and you get really excited. Oh, maybe I'll get a free pizza. And this is just amped up to 100 in this book. So we find out that he's got his pizza late. He's freaking out. He's at 22 minutes when he picks up the pizza because there was a fire and it's just crazy. So he's, whatever, I have to get it there because literally Uncle Enzo and the mafia will kill me if I don't deliver this correctly because you don't upset the mafia. Just do your job. So we've got Hero going through crazy things happening. Of course, every single problem that can happen happens. And then there is this courier girl. Her name is YT, which stands for yours truly, possibly something else. We never really find out. It's just what she goes by. And she's this young girl. She's about 15. And she harpoons onto his car. So she's got this big magnet, and it's like she's skateboard surfing behind his car, and he's freaking out. He's really upset about it. He ends up crashing. Now, here is the consequential moment in the first chapter and why we start the story here. YT takes that pizza and she ends up delivering it at like 29 minutes and 59 seconds. She had taken the pizza under her arm and she threw it at the feet of this suburban white man who was already celebrating, thinking, oh, I beat the mafia, blah, blah, blah. We hear like the helicopter wings of the mafia. The head of the mafia is probably right there waiting to apologize to this guy. And there's no guarantee that your pizza is going to be any good. So YT made no effort to protect said pizza, but the pizza made it there, and it made it there in time. And the reason that this is consequential is this is the moment where all of our characters come together. Hero owes a debt to YT, the mafia owes a debt to YT, and they all end up working together. Now, Hero doesn't actually deliver pizzas at all for the rest of the book. He's done. You don't get to make that big of a mistake and keep that job. So for as exciting as the first chapter is, that's where the pizza delivery stuff stops. It was just the setup for the story. Now, the rest of the book, the rest of the 71 chapters of the book have to do with kind of this impending infocalypse, which is like an info apocalypse. And it's such a hard word for me to say. There were definitely words in this book that I was making up when you're reading and you're just like, oh, okay, that's the word with the F at the beginning. Infocalypse, I definitely was just like info apocalypse every time because I think it's weird. It's hard to say. So we're just going to roll with it for the rest of this episode. So we find out that Hero, in addition to delivering pizzas, is also a hacker. In this world, and the definition of hacker here is he's like a coder. So he has helped build the metaverse. And really cool thing is that this is the first time in literature where metaverse was used. So Stevenson coined the term metaverse to talk about this virtual reality where you plug in and you got goggles and you're on this kind of shared internet space. Now, in this book, everything is run through fiber optics. So that was a fun little, we don't technically have Wi-Fi, although there were times where they could get in by satellite, but that was not mainstream. So that was a fun little look at the future. We've got the metaverse, we've got avatars. So everybody has an avatar. This is very much so like you can see where books like Ready Player One leaned so much on what Stevenson built. And there's a lot of time that's actually spent in this book because you can tell this is the first time some of these concepts have been put down on paper for a more general audience. Now, I'm sure, nothing comes from nowhere. There were engineers, there were computer people talking about these concepts, but this is the first big flash in fiction. So we spend a lot of time talking about what is an avatar and what is the metaverse and how does all that work so that later, when we've got other books like Ready Player One and things like that, they're just so ingrained in our understanding of technology that all somebody has to do is put on goggles and look around and see something, and maybe we've got like a shower of pixels somewhere and then it solidifies into a person, but you're in this world that's just like a little bit different. You don't have to do all of the legwork that Stevenson had to do. So that's definitely where some of the word count came in, was building these worlds and these concepts that were really new to people. I was looking at kind of the history of this book and the publication and talking about what was the world like in 1992. And I was just a young babe, so I didn't remember. I know it was Bush Sr. was president. We had come off of the Cold War. Russia was this huge specter in everyone's brains. So we've got a lot of those types of themes in the book. And I think it's really important to look at it that way. I had this moment about halfway through the book where I was thinking about all of these things and I just flipped to the last page, and this is the first time that I personally have really written notes in a book. And let me tell you, it was really fun. I got to the point where I was like, oh, this is great. Writing myself little reactions and thoughts and things like that. If you have never, I know some people are very precious about their books, but I bought this book secondhand. It did not come in perfect condition. I love a floppy paperback. And now I love a floppy paperback that I can write my thoughts in. So I wrote on the back, like with poetry, science fiction uses defamiliarization to engage with ideas that may be too taboo or not receiving the proper attention in their current day. Sci-fi's power and value doesn't lie in its predictive power, which we see inevitably disproven, but rather as a lens on the society of its time. And then I wrote myself a question. I said, so what is Stevenson trying to say about America in the late 80s and the early 90s? I could write a whole dissertation about this. Now, if you don't know what defamiliarization is, it's something that poets do. So if you've ever read a poem and it goes on and you realize by the end, you're like, oh, they were talking about a flower, or they were talking about a teapot, or whatever, but it didn't make sense until the end. That's because they were doing defamiliarization. They're talking about things in such detail and looking at it from a different angle so that we can appreciate it in a different way. So something that we take for granted, like flowers, a poet can go on and make flowers about, I don't know, youth and life and death all at once. I think science fiction functions very similarly. Now, science fiction, when it's done well, is a really great way to feed messages and thoughts and ideas to a general populace without hitting them over the head, without being preachy, without being a nonfiction book. Off the top of my head, Fourth Wing. Super, super popular, right? Hits all of these demographics that wouldn't normally pick up, say, a book about misinformation, a book about history where we're talking about who controls the narrative and all of those things. But that's what Fourth Wing's about. It's about who chooses what we know draped in dragons. Good science fiction does this. And what this book is really talking about and is really diving into is this info apocalypse. We get into all of this Sumerian myth and history about language and how does language work and how do we as humans communicate, which is such a huge topic, right? And that's at the core of this book. So what we find out is that there is this guy who, his name is L. Bob Reif, and he is the head of a monopoly that controls all of the fiber optics that are controlling the metaverse, right? It's connecting everybody. He also has a huge Bible college and has this cult that has exploded. And this cult speaks in tongues. They are expanding all over the world. There is this raft in the Pacific full of refugees who are now a part of this cult. And there's just a lot of things going on with this guy. And this is tied to this ancient Sumerian myth of the Tower of Babel. Now, stay with me here. Tower of Babel, if you haven't heard of it, they were building a tower trying to reach heaven. God said, no, you can't do that. That's against my rules. And he strikes them all, and they all of a sudden don't speak the same language. And now everybody's confused and they can't build this tall tower. Now, that's the story that I grew up with, the Bible version. There is the Sumerian version that has the Sumerian gods involved. It gets really granular in this book. Super interesting, though. Definitely not saying that this is a textbook, but you learn more about Sumerian history and myths. And I don't know how much of it is accurate, because who knows? I'm not fact checking, but you learn a lot about that myth. So what we find out is that Asherah, who was a Sumerian goddess, had this virus that spread, and that was everybody could speak ancient Sumerian, which they connect with speaking in tongues in the modern day. And everybody spoke the same language. And it's something that we can't really comprehend because their brains were built different. And Asherah pissed off some other Sumerian gods. And so to punish all of this, that's where the Tower of Babel comes in. And they split it so that nobody could speak Sumerian. But this virus from Asherah doesn't go away. It's still there throughout history. It spreads from people. If you say like the right magic incantation, it can spread. What we're seeing in the book is that there are a couple different versions of this virus. There are the versions that if you've already been infected and you can speak in tongues, and which is ancient Sumerian or whatever, if you swapped saliva, if you swapped other body fluids, if you injected someone with your blood, you could spread the virus. And then you're a part of this cult, the cult of Bob Reif. And so there's that branch that is happening. But then there is also this hacker branch, because everything comes down to computer code, binary, ones and zeros. And there's a lot of technical stuff about that in the book that can be really interesting, especially if you understand computer stuff. But we find out that there is this drug. This is the titular drug, Snow Crash, which causes your computer to crash, your avatar to crash, and it actually literally like scrambles your brain if you understand binary code. So Snow Crash can also convert these people. But Snow Crash, if you're a hacker and you understand binary and things, it scrambles your brain. So Hero's friend, David, spelled with a 5 instead of a V because we're being cool, we're being cyberpunk. He gets hit with Snow Crash because he thinks, ooh, I can take this drug, I'm stronger, my antivirus will take care of it. Nope, he gets scrambled brains. So Hero is trying to figure out, where is the Snow Crash coming from? What's going on? And it's his whole deal to work together with YT, to work together with the mafia to stop this infocalypse from happening and Bob Reif from taking over the world, basically. And it's really just a crazy adventure. There are skateboards, there are explosions, there are nuclear bombs in the sidecar of a motorcycle driven by an Aleutian native. It's wild. It's really cool. Now, in the spirit of sci-fi snacks, we're still going to talk about what I loved and what I learned. There was exactly one place that I cried in this book, and I have to share it with you because I absolutely loved it. But there was this moment in the middle where we find out that there are these rat things. They're always called rat things, but essentially we find out they are dogs that have been souped up into these almost like nuclear-driven robot dogs, but they still think of themselves as dogs, right? They are part of security defense system for the Hong Kong franchises. It ends up being really important in this one part because we find out that this one rat thing dog was actually a dog that belonged to YT for a hot minute. So this dog was on the street and it got shot, it got hurt, and YT took it in and took care of this dog. And we get this all through backstory. And we find out that she comes back one day and the dog is gone. And she's just always been really sad about it. And isn't that terrible that they take these dogs and they steal them and they make them into these robots? And that's just so cruel. And it's explained that these dogs are living their best life. They are now living in a world when they're in their little huts, that they are living in a world where steak grows on trees and they have a happy little yard and they get to go out, and what dog wouldn't love to run at 700 miles per hour? That's amazing. So they run at 700 miles per hour and disarm everyone, and then they go back to their little house and they can have their steak that grows on the trees and they can listen to all the other little doggies in their neighborhood. And it was just this really sweet moment that kind of ended ambiguously. And then we get this little almost short story. And I thought this was great for sci-fi snacks because this felt like a short story within the bigger novel. Like Stevenson didn't need to give this to us, but he gave us this little moment where he cleared it up and it came from the dog's perspective. And we find out that dog is the dog that YT took care of. And the dog remembers this nice girl who took care of him when the world was just terrible. And he hopes that all the other doggies he can hear. And he knows that, oh, she's in danger. But then they save her. And we just get this really happy moment of resolution for this robot dog. And I just started crying. My husband walked in and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yes. The dog is happy and safe." And yeah, so we had a happy ending for the dog. We touched on some of these things as I described the story to you, but I really just wanted to share with you some of my favorite lines from this book. Remember, this book is positioned as a cyberpunk book, but because of the satire, I think it's more of a post-cyberpunk. We are looking at cyberpunk as a genre and we are making fun of it in certain ways, while also pointing out things about the United States and the current political situation. And some of these quotes just hit a little too hard. There's a quote about McDonald's. And this world that they live in, there are sections of it that are just, it's all franchises, right? There's no more mom and pop stores. It's all corporations. It's all franchised. And I think back in 92, it was much less so than it is now. We still had franchises, obviously, but it wasn't to the extent that it is now in 2025. And so reading certain things just really hit me. I highlighted this one part where he's talking about in olden times, you go to Mom's Cafe and you get the blue plate special and you're connecting with real people in the real world. And it's not like that anymore. Now, a businessman goes from New Jersey to New Mexico. He can walk into a McDonald's and nobody's going to stare at him. He's going to know what's there. They're going to know why he's there. He doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. It said, "McDonald's is home, condensed into a 3-ring binder and Xeroxed. No surprises is the motto of the franchise ghetto, its good housekeeping seal, subliminally blazoned on every sign and logo that make up the curves and grids of light that outline the basin. The people of America, who live in the world's most surprising and terrible country, take comfort in that motto." And I was just like, excuse me. Okay, ouch, true. Because I never looked at it that way, but I worked a job one summer where I almost quit. And it was just the worst summer stock experience I had ever been a part of. The people were lovely. Most of the people were lovely. But one day I just got in my car and I started driving south. I didn't even pack. I didn't know what I was doing. It was my one day off in 2 months. And I just started driving. And then I saw a McDonald's. I had been living in a resort town where there were no franchises, nothing. And so I see this McDonald's and I pulled in and I literally ordered like one of everything. It was a lot, but I was in a bad place. And I just sat there and I ate all of my McDonald's. And then I sat there and I said, I don't have any of my stuff, so I should probably go back. I had driven like an hour away. I was on my way home without everything. And then I was like, I don't want to let down the actors. I don't want to let down the director. They are lovely people. And I need my stuff. So I finished my McDonald's. I got back in my car and I went back and finished out the summer stock season. And so this line in particular hit me so hard because it's true. McDonald's was that comfortable, no surprises place. My life was chaos. It was insane. I was crying every day. An apple pie at McDonald's is an apple pie at McDonald's everywhere. And a double cheeseburger and a caramel sundae. All of those comfort things that I had throughout my childhood. McDonald's was a special treat. I had all these really good memories attached to McDonald's, and it's the same everywhere. I can tap into all of those good memories through that food. Just the line about the people of America who live in the world's most surprising and terrible country take comfort in that motto. And I was like, satire hits really hard when it's so true. That was one of the things I really loved about this book. There was another part that I really loved, which we won't go too deep into the AI conversation, because there were these avatars, they call them like daemons. I'm not sure if it's pronounced demons or daemons, but I always say daemons in my head. And they're essentially like an avatar of an artificial intelligence that can tap into the metaverse and the Library of Congress, which has folded into the internet and things like that. And I had this one note in the margins where Hero asks our librarian, Damon, what did this guy have on his mind? What was he getting at? Don't go into a lot of detail, but what was he thinking? And the librarian says, what do I look like, a psychologist? I can't answer those kinds of questions. And in the moment, I was like, that is how ChatGPT needs to answer instead of gassing us up. And how far, I love this prediction of the future where our AI would have some guardrails to it and say, hey, I am not a psychologist. I can't answer that question. I can give you facts. Because there are a lot of people, I feel like nowadays, who are treating AI like it is all of those things because there are no guardrails on any of it. And ChatGPT would be like, I think he was thinking blah, 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 because it's just a word prediction algorithm and it's not actually intelligent. But because of the marketing and the way people see AI, they then would take that as gospel. Oh, ChatGPT told me, Chat told me. The people who talk about ChatGPT like it's a real person drive me insane. That's a conversation for another time. But yeah, I loved Stevenson's maybe optimistic view of what technology could bring us. All of this information at our fingertips, and surprise, all of it's correct, all of it's researched, all of it's backed up by actual things, and they don't just make shit up. What a wild world. See, that's where one of the spots where I'm like, Stevenson got something wrong. This is closer to Google. Not that Google is like perfect or anything, and you still have to know how to vet results. But this is what I think people want, or people thought they wanted, was this kind of friend who has infinite knowledge, but instead, we got something that just makes everything up and tells you what you want to hear. So it gives this appearance of what we've got in science fiction novels for years. And instead, it's just AI slop. Lame. Another thing that I really loved about this book, we talked about a little earlier, its connections to language and how much this book deals with things like speaking in tongues. In a moment of kind of synchronicity in this world, I was listening to an audiobook at the same time as I was reading this. So I'm somebody who usually has 2, maybe 3 books going. I usually divide by format though. So I love listening to nonfiction books as audiobooks. It feels like a podcast to me. It's a deep dive for 12 hours into a single subject. Love that. So the book I was listening to while I was reading Snow Crash is called Cultish. And I thought it was just a more pop culture-y, ooh, it's not a cult, but it's cult-ish, right? That's what I thought when I saw the title. But what I ignored was the fact that the subtitle told me that's not what that book was. It was a linguistics book. So instead of like English or Spanish, it's cultish, which is the language of cults and how we use language to influence people and to draw them in and to control them in a way that doesn't feel controlling. And there were so many parallels to this book about how language has power that I just thought were amazing. And also, it was the first time I had ever heard of the word glossolalia, which is speaking in tongues. That's how the academics talk about it. And I didn't even know that was a thing. I honestly was just like, oh, that's just, people just make up sounds. And yeah, that's probably a big part of it. But the study of it is actually there. So that's why I think at about 200 pages in, so just before, not even halfway through the book, I wrote a note where they're talking about this neurolinguistic virus, and there are tablets. And in ancient Sumer, there was a tablet with something written on it. And if you said this incantation, they call it a namshub. And if you would say that, it was this virus that kind of broke down your ability to speak in tongues and things like that. And I wrote, and now Snow Crash is undoing this, ? Why they would all devolve to speaking in tongues, like we're undoing everything. Going back to a unified speech, Sumerian for all humans. So I put it together halfway through the book. It didn't make it any less entertaining or exciting because, believe me, there were lots of things that happened that I did not put together. But I thought that was really an exciting thing. And if you're going to read, if you like nonfiction, reading Cultish was a really unexpectedly cool companion to this book. Now, we've already touched on some of the things that I learned earlier in the podcast, but one of the things I didn't talk about yet was on a more literary level, like a writing skills level. What did I learn from this book? So I'm reading for entertainment, yes, but I'm also reading to be like, why is this a book that so many people have recommended? What is it? It gets overwhelmingly good reviews. Even now, it can be tough for science fiction to have staying power outside of nostalgia. So for people to have read this in the 2020s, 30 years after it was first published, and to say, this still holds up. Not to say there aren't problematic things, like I think we can all agree that our main character, YT, at 15, the book would not be published with her being a 15-year-old today. She is far too adult in a lot of these situations that is not tackled in a kind of sensitive matter. So you do see that in later criticisms of the book. I will say, I don't think she was written like a 15-year-old. It felt very much like Stevenson made her 15, and this is not to excuse anything, but it felt like she was made 15 so that she could live at home, so that we could have her mom character be a part of things that she needed to be plot-wise. But in reality, in this dystopian America, like, intergenerational living would not be weird. So it would be so easy to just be like, yeah, she's 20, she's 22, she's living at home. And then the stuff that felt icky and problematic, some of it was called out on the page, because there were moments where it was like the head of the mafia had this crush on her that was always kept platonic and felt like father-daughter-ish. But even YT would make comments about it, about how, oh, there's always men like leering at me and things like that. So there's definitely commentary there. But in general, I wanted to look at this book and be like, why does it still hold up for the most part? What does it do on a line level? What does it do structurally? And what I found really interesting is that it breaks a ton of rules. Chuck Wendig talked about this in his Reactor Mag article, where he was like, he breaks all the rules. But what he learned was you can break them if you do it well. And one of the things that comes up over and over again in reviews is that Stevenson tends to infodump, but nobody seems to mind. I marked chapter 30 because literally chapter 30 broke all the rules of infodumping. And this was the first big part. It happens again later in the book. But chapter 30 is all dialogue back and forth between Hero and the librarian AI character. And literally there's nothing else. There's maybe a couple of dialogue tags so that we know at the beginning, okay, Hero talks first and then the librarian responds. And then after that first half page, it's literally just back and forth dialogue, like it's a play. Now, the dialogue is interesting. It's fascinating. You're getting all of the information you need about ancient Sumeria and what's happening. And oh my gosh, there's all this stuff about Deuteronomy and the history of religion. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, this is a lot. This is a huge info dump. It was super interesting the whole time. I didn't realize until after, because I was literally looking for it. I was like, all of these questions are motivated. Hero wouldn't know the answers to these. So this isn't like a a literary cheat where you have a character call out like, "Hey, brother, how are you today?" "Oh, I'm terrible because our parents are dead." It's not that kind of dialogue that is super telly in the fact that we're trying to give information to the audience and we're doing it in a really ham-handed way. This was all motivated. Hero needed to know these things. And the librarian, perfect AI character. He's literally, his whole shtick is knowing stuff. So it's not weird in terms of the world. It makes sense in this world that this conversation would happen and it would happen in the way that it happens. And yeah, it harkens back to that if you do it well. So if you're going to info dump, first of all, don't do it on the first page. Some people say Stevenson did it on the first page. It does take a moment to even get the name of our main character, which I don't think you need the name right off the bat. There's kind of some of those cliche, like really hooky, I feel like they come from Twitter pitch land, like first lines that give you first name, last name, blah, 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 blah. And I do it myself. It's a convention of our time. But Stevenson, he does give us a character type, the deliberator. So at first we don't have a name, but we do get about a page, half a page of kind of information about the world. And it is a little heavier on the world building, which if it's interesting, like Chuck Wendig said, if you break the rules, be awesome at it. It doesn't matter. I think that's something that you can swing both ways as a writer, where you start and you break a bunch of rules and you do it poorly because you just didn't know the rules existed. And then everybody says, you got to know the rules to break the rules. And then you learn the rules. And a lot of people feel like they can't work outside of them because, oh, I can't ever tell because it's show, don't tell. But then as you grow as a writer, you realize like it's show and tell. Show the emotionally impactful things and then tell the boring stuff. So it's this spectrum as you grow as a writer to realize like you can break the rules. And I think Stevenson breaks the rules all over the place. And part of that I think really has to do with leaning into a satirical genre and playing with the rules and the perceived rules of the subgenre. We've talked all season about the definitions of these subgenres, and Cyberpunk has that gritty feel of the hardware and that kind of thing. And then Stevenson kicks it up a notch, and we're talking about language and we're talking about software and we're talking about all of these things. But then we also have mafia pizza delivery men with katanas on their backs. It's not a serious book in a lot of ways, but it's also very seriously making these choices about how it presents the information. So what I learned is if you're going to break the rules, smash them, blow it up, do it for a reason and do it well. Don't tiptoe around it. Smash it. Go crazy. People will love it or people will hate it. And you know what? It doesn't matter because I haven't met a single person in real life who's, oh, that book was so awful. I hate it and I tell everybody not to read it. No. I'm meeting people who are evangelists for this book. And I think it's funny that you meet so many people who are spreading the good news of Snow Crash, because when the themes of the book are, they never use the word memes in here, but in reality, the virus of the book spreads like a meme. So internet culture now is just flooded with these. It was not like this in 92. I'm sure information is always moved in this way, but we see it amplified so well now with internet memes. You know, something that's funny, you put a picture and some words together and then it spreads and it infects other people and they download it onto their phone and they share it with other people. And it becomes this like ubiquitous thing in society and it spreads like a virus, right? It's not living. It can't actually propagate on its own. What it does is it infects those around it and uses you as a vector to spread it. So we're all spreading internet viruses through memes kind of thing. And I thought that was just such a really interesting way of looking at information as a virus. That was something that I had never connected those dots in my own brain, even though I've done a ton of research on both of those things. So this book brought it all together for me. We're approaching the end of things here. I know I have been talking for a long time about this long book, but what I wanted to end with was the biggest thing I learned, I think, is about the importance of a hook. I know on my personal writing journey, having a hook for my writing is sometimes the most frustrating thing if you haven't started there. So a lot of the time, story ideas for me will be like a single thing and I'll start from that hook. But when I don't and I explore a story and it evolves into something, distilling it down into a hook can be really difficult. But what I've noticed is that this book is evangelized through its hook. Everywhere it's described in the blurb and when people talk to you about it, they talk about the mafia pizza delivery. And that's literally just the first chapter. It's the impetus for everything that happens. And never once do I hear somebody talking about Snow Crash and they talk about ancient Sumeria, even though way more page time is dedicated to ancient Sumerian language. But that's not the hook of the story. And I think that I get so caught up in trying to summarize my whole story into 1 or 2 sentences to try and be able to put it in a query letter, to sell it, to whatever, to talk about it to people. They ask you, hey, what are you writing? And you say something and it doesn't feel like it's enough. So my current book that I'm working on, I've been describing it with a hook. And that hook is Big Brother reality TV meets Mars colonization. And to me, it feels woefully inadequate because there's so much more to the book. And the main character isn't even a part of the reality TV portion. She's somebody who just watches it with us. But the reality is that is the hook. That's what's going to get people in there. That's what's going to get people reading at the start is they're going to be like, oh, that's a crazy idea. How does that expand to, in this case, how does the pizza delivery guy for the mafia with the katanas expand to 162,000 words? Obviously, it's more than just about mafia pizza. So I need to take that confidence and be like, I can describe my book as reality TV meets the colonization of Mars with confidence because, of course, that's not the whole book. Of course, there's more to it. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. It just has to be the thing it's the meme that grabs people's attention and infects them so that they want more. One critique I might have of the book is that there is a phenomenon in music that I always have talked about feeling jealous of, is that there are the songs that just fade out and you can hear them. They're still singing. They never really wrap up. They just fade out. And I, as a writer, have always felt very jealous of that as an artistic option because I was like, sometimes endings are hard and I wish that I could just fade out and be done. And I think that this book did that. So that would be my one critique of something I didn't love is I got to the ending and I was having a great time and everything was going crazy and there's these battles and a couple people are hanging in between life and death. And we just get this moment where YT meets up with her mom and is like, are you ready to go home? And she's like, yeah, let's go home. The end. Boo, Stevenson, you just faded out on your own story. Didn't give us resolution. We got resolution for the dog storyline, which was wonderful. And probably the most important thing for a lot of people, me included, that we know that the dog is living his best life and is happy. And YT's got some stuff to work out with her mom. And the world is still a terrible place, but it's not as bad. Hero has saved us all from Snow Crash. The gathering of hackers didn't end up getting their brains turned to scrambled eggs. And ostensibly, he will have a lot of work in the future working for other hackers because he's proved himself to be a hero, Hero. So I want to leave you with the thought of a pizza party. I'm going to go and celebrate finishing season 2 with some pizza and probably some wine, and I'm going to unplug for a little bit. I am so looking forward to a holiday season full of reading time, and I want to let you know that we will be back with season 3 in the new year. January is my birthday month, so we are going to be talking about celebrated stories as we celebrate my birthday. I thought that would be fun. So if you have a favorite award-winning short story that you've read, I would love to hear about it. You can email me at sci-fi snackspod, P-O-D, @gmail.com, or reach out on any social media platform where I am active at Liz J. Bradley. You can always find all of those on my website at lizjbradley.com. I cannot wait to see you in the new year. I hope you take some time to unplug, catch up on old podcast episodes, listen to audiobooks, read short stories, read big stories. I cannot wait to share with all of you everything I read over this holiday season in the new year. Thank you so much for listening, and keep on snacking.